Have you ever caught yourself just sitting there, not scrolling, not watching anything, just staring at the wall while your mind runs off without you? And someone walks in and asks, "What are you doing?" And you say, "Nothing." But that's a lie, isn't it? Because in your head, you are somewhere else entirely, replaying a conversation from 3 years ago, rehearsing one that hasn't happened yet, building an entire alternate life where you said the right thing at the right time. We tend to assume that people who live inside their heads a lot are either deeply wise or quietly broken. Either they're the next great philosopher or they're avoiding something. But the psychological reality is messier and honestly more interesting than that. Because there are two very different things happening when someone retreats into their own mind. And most of us can't tell which one we're doing. Let's call them solitude and escapism. They look almost identical from the outside. Same posture, same glazed eyes, same nothing when you ask what's going on. But underneath, they're doing completely different jobs for your brain. Solitude is what happens when your mind uses quiet time to process, integrate, and make sense of your life. Psychologists sometimes talk about this in terms of the default mode network, that cluster of brain regions that lights up specifically when you're not focused on a task. It's the part of you that comes online in the shower, on a long walk, in the gap right before sleep. And here's the thing that surprises people. That network isn't idle, it's working. It's stitching together memories, rehearsing social scenarios, updating your sense of who you are. Some of your best insights, the ones that feel like they arrived out of nowhere, were actually assembled quietly in that background hum of solitary thought. Escapism, on the other hand, is your mind using the same retreat, the same inward turn, but for a completely different reason, not to process life, but to avoid it. Think about the difference between someone journaling through a breakup, letting themselves actually feel the loss and make sense of it, versus someone who breaks up with reality itself, disappearing into daydreams where the breakup never happened, where they said something devastating and clever, where they win every argument they lost in real life. Same inward gaze, opposite function. One is digestion, the other is avoidance dressed up as reflection. And here's where it gets genuinely tricky, because escapism doesn't always look dramatic. It's not always the guy who never leaves his room. Sometimes it's the high-functioning overthinker at a party, technically present, nodding along, while 3/4 of their processing power is somewhere else entirely, replaying a text message they sent an hour ago. Psychologist Susan Nolan Hoxema spent years studying what she called rumination, that loop of going over and over a problem without actually resolving it. And what she found was almost cruel in its irony. The people who ruminate the most often believe they're being productive. They think they're figuring it out. But rumination isn't thinking. It's a treadmill dressed up as a journey. You move and move and move, and somehow never arrive anywhere. So how do you tell them apart in your own life? Here's a decent rule of thumb. Solitude usually leaves you a little clearer. You go in with a knot in your chest and you come out with something resembling an answer, or at least a softer version of the question. Escapism tends to leave you a little more tired, a little more disconnected, like you just ate a meal that didn't actually feed you. It's the psychological equivalent of doom scrolling versus reading. Both involve staring at a screen, but only one of them leaves you with anything.
There's also a cultural bias baked into all of this that's worth naming. We live in a world engineered for output. Being in your head gets treated as a symptom, something to fix, something adjacent to laziness or social failure. But history tells a different story. Some of the deepest human insight didn't come from constant engagement with the world. It came from long stretches of deliberate withdrawal. Monastic traditions across cultures built entire spiritual practices around solitude, not as escape, but as confrontation, sitting with yourself until you actually meet yourself. Darwin took long solitary walks specifically to think. Einstein described some of his best ideas arriving not at his desk, but in quiet, undirected moments. The inward-facing mind isn't a malfunction, it's a tool. The question was never whether you should go inward, it's what you're doing once you get there. And maybe that's the real shift in perspective here. If you're someone who spends a lot of time in your head, the goal isn't to shame yourself out of it, and it isn't to romanticize it either. It's to get curious about which version you're doing moment to moment. Are you sitting with the discomfort, letting your mind actually work through it? Or are you building an escape hatch, a nicer, safer, more flattering version of reality to hide inside? Neither answer makes you broken. Escapism isn't a character flaw, it's often just an exhausted mind looking for relief the fastest way it knows how. But relief and resolution aren't the same thing, and only one of them actually changes anything. So next time you catch yourself drifting off mid-conversation, staring at nothing, somewhere else entirely, don't just assume you're wasting time. Ask yourself what your mind is actually doing back there. Is it working something out, or is it hiding? That one honest question might be the most useful thing you do all day. If this made you think about your own habit of disappearing into your head, I'd genuinely love to hear which one you catch yourself doing more. Drop it in the comments. And if you want more of these deep dives into the quiet, strange mechanics of your own mind, stick around. There's a lot more in here worth understanding.